host as always, Edward Jones, and joining me, of course, is my co-host, Miss Kim Lowe.
Hello.
Tonight we are on the festival circuit as we check out a documentary that we were very fortunate to get a screener of, so thank you very much to Kim for sorting this one out. Tonight we're going to be looking at Clapboard Jungle, Surviving the Independent Film Business by Justin McConnell, a new documentary which not only charts his own struggles within the film industry, but also a survival guide for the independent filmmaker of getting your film out there and noticed, especially in these times where everyone is able to make films, and it's become something of a saturated market as the documentary sets out to explore amongst obviously following Justin and his journey as a filmmaker. Kim, I mean, opening thoughts on this one. I mean, do you watch a lot of documentaries or documentaries about filmmaking in general?
Actually, I don't watch a whole lot of documentaries. In general, I guess I watch maybe one or two a year, if anything. Maybe one a year. Not a whole lot on movie making either. Those are really serious topics. It's not really my sort of thing, I guess, because I don't know. I find documentaries, for me at least, I really like choosing topics that I like, and then usually I end up regretting it because it turns out to be animal related, and it's always about animal cruelty or something, and then I feel really sad and depressed afterwards. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a whole new experience. I mean, I think I had watched one before on I guess how hard it is to make AAA games as well. There was one Playing Hard. That was the process of making For Honor, I think. Is that game? For Honor?
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
By Ubisoft, and the journey of pretty much the creative director, and I think that was also during the Fantasia festival circuit.
Awesome. Well, as we said already, I mean, this one is a documentary directed by Justin McConnell. It's kind of unique in the fact that it's not just a focus on one on the particular topic of getting a film made and distributed, but also following his own journey as a filmmaker, which is kind of gives us this two-thread story as he's here amassed an impressive collection of interviews, to say the least, including some interviews which I assume would be some of the final interview footage when we look at the likes of Sid Haig and George A. Romero, who are sadly no longer with us, and you combine this with the likes of Guillermo del Toro, Michael Biehn, Tom Savini, Paul Schrader. The list kind of goes on and on with this one of all the people that he's managed to introduce, and it ranges not only from actors and established personalities within the filmmaking world, but also a lot of independent directors and producers and some actors as well. So it's a wide range of subjects that he includes interview footage with throughout the film, and I mean, it's quite a short film. It only runs 98 minutes, but how did you actually find the film itself, Kim?
The documentary was interesting. I mean, especially since the last few years, I've been pretty much, my main new movies that I watch are all on the festival circuit. I don't go to mainstream theaters anymore. That was one of the things they did talk about in the documentary. But I mean, I like what they were talking about, and how I think as bloggers and reviewers ourselves, and that sort of personality looking into this, I feel like they make a really good point a lot of times, and you see the hard work that just looking at how much the hurdles that he had to go through just to get his project off the ground. And it's one project after the next, and you have to accumulate so much in your back pocket to hope that someone's gonna pick up that vision or keep you on as director and greenlight your project. And there's so many things that he needs to go through, and I really like that this is very much his survival guide, as in he goes through the process of getting his film made, but at the same time we also have a lot of advices and vision and opinions about the market right now, the movie market, whether it's mainstream, whether it's the independent, whether it's genre cinema, whatever. Everybody has their own views, and a lot of these people that he interviews is, I mean, some of them I've seen from, especially since there's a big focus on Fantasia Festival. I've seen a lot of these people because I cover the Fantasia Festival for, I think, the past 5-6 years now. So I know a lot of the people that he talks about and how credible a lot of them are. And at the same time, there's also, like you said, there's a lot of bigger names who at this point has gotten a lot of fame, but also came from, I think all directors come from this indie platform, and then they grow from there. And if you're lucky, you turn into Guillermo del Toro, who gets, the big bucks behind his projects, right? Or, like that sort of stuff. And they all talk about the different things you need to be aware of at the different stages that he's at when he's looking for, when he's trying to look for funding and getting his movies off the ground. And every single phase he goes through, they give really good feedback on just the process itself, what each of them think is important, and to having a successful, I guess, funding for your, and just what goes into all of this.
Yeah, I think this is certainly a very sobering view. If you're a young, aspiring filmmaker, I think this is a very sobering view of the industry as a whole. The fact that, as it points out, the fact there is so much content now, but not enough places to actually push it. Be it via the various streaming services, or as a physical release, or in theatres. We're now in this place where I think it's the same for a lot of the creative industry, be it, filmmaking or writing or podcasting, whatever your sort of creative output happens to be. We're now in this place where we've made it too easy for ourselves to produce content, but now we're swamped in content.
Yeah.
And how you stand out from everybody else is one of the sort of main questions posed here. So I think right from the start, it's sort of like it's kind of crushing if you are that young aspiring filmmaker. And as they say, one of the interview subjects says that when you start out, you think it's going to be like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You get this golden ticket and you get to go off and make your vision, and you have this amazing career just because you've made your film, and it will instantly get out there and people will see it. And as we see throughout the film, it's just not the case. You can go to Cannes and you can have a huge stack of business cards and ultimately have nothing to show for it at the end of it. It's not just a case of getting into film festivals or getting the word out there. You have to have all these other different things. You have to have a lookbook, and you gotta have a sample or a proof of concept, and it's all these different things that we see him putting together, and basically not just trying to get one project off the ground, but many different projects off the ground, as we see his slate.
Yeah, over the years that this documentary goes on. I mean, this documentary starts in 2014, right? And yes. in right now we're 2020, and at this point, I think they probably wrapped up on it at 2019 or something like that. So it was a long time to see all this, and I really like the similarity of getting a project off the ground is similar to getting financing is like finding a job. That's what I felt like when he was talking about how you have to get your project, to get someone to fund you. You need to show that you're experienced, but in order to show your work, you need to have money. But it's kind of like this revolving circle, and then you just it's just like this whole little circle of impossible, because they want something, and then it's like when you look for a job, they want you to have experience, but without a job you don't have experience. So it's that person who takes that chance on you.
Yes, exactly. It's I think it's kind of like a bit of a harsh wake-up call, and I think not only to the audience but also to McConnell as a whole, because I think he enters in sort of these bright ideas, and the fact that he just thinks it's going to, if he just goes to this one festival, or if he speaks to this one person, that it's all going to sort of fall into place. And we see him that he's working on this book adaptation throughout the film, and I mean, with McConnell, he's kind of in the unique situation that he's made several films at this point, and he's had films obviously released out there. He's had shorts, and they've been met with sort of like the mixed reviews, but nothing's really sort of launched his career the way that he wants to, and this is what he's obviously hoping to achieve over the course of the film. Initially with this, as I said, with this book adaptation, I'm trying to remember what the name of the book is now. Pardon?
Mark of Cain.
Yeah, Mark of Cain, this sort of pulp horror novel that he puts together this whole sort of picture, he puts down script for, and I mean, even by the end of the film, they're still trying to get it made, and it's really the his shapeshifter horror film that he manages to finally get the funding for, and sort of set him on this path of being a filmmaker. So how did you find him though as a subject to obviously follow throughout? 'Cause I mean, obviously we switch back and forth between numerous talking head interviews and obviously his journey, but I mean, just separating his journey from the rest of the film here, I mean, how did you find him as a subject to follow?
I think for me it's a little bit more close to my heart in that sense, because I saw Life Changer, which is the movie that by the end of the documentary he had gotten funding for, and it was through this movie that I knew about his name, and for me, watching the process of him doing all of this is something that you don't know about as when you're reviewing a movie, obviously. Granted, I didn't say anything bad about the movie. I really did like Life Changer a lot. But I think he's really interesting in the sense that I mean, it feels very like homemade video style. Like, you know, like the selfie where his camera is up to his face all the time. And
yeah.
But you see, I think as a subject, he's really interesting. Mostly because of all the hurdles he's gone through to get a project that he believes should you know, that deserves to be in front of the screen, and especially because he has you know, a cast that is really, really good, that he's trying to just kind of kick off the project. And at the same time, it's not just about him finding a movie, but at the same time, it's about finding his confidence and finding his place of how to approach this whole thing. So during the whole thing, it's not just about him seeking out all these conversations and all these connections that he needs to build in order to go to these cons, and then change his vision on how he wants to approach getting his project greenlit. But at the same time, we also see him going through a personal change where he's eating healthy, and then he's exercising a lot, and he's kind of changing his life internally and psychologically as well, to kind of have, I guess, a better mindset into going through this. And it's at this point, you know, when we start the documentary, he says straight out about how he's not sure. It's pretty much along the lines that he's not sure of himself as a filmmaker anymore because of all the doubts that's been there. And yet, you know, he still keeps going on this journey. And by the end of it, we see this change, like, throughout, where he changes himself a lot, and then he starts being more outgoing. This is not just something he's working on by himself. It's something where he's approaching other people, and he's learning a lot from this process, and he's changing his trajectory every little bit to try and kind of expand what he's doing and add more things to you know, show proof of concept, like different little tips that he learns to just kind of advance forward to that final stage where he finally gets a project done. So I think he's an intriguing subject. I mean, it's very personal. It's very, you see a lot of the path that he's taking and the struggles, and that really highlights, it really gives that contrast with the people that he's interviewing. So I think it's set up really good. Like,
Okay. I personally find them a bit tedious in places, to be honest.
It does.
Sort of like,
I do get where you're coming from. Like, tedious, I do get. For me, though, I have a really short attention span for documentaries. It's one of the reasons why I don't watch them so much.
yeah. It's felt like his journey, and just he lacks any sort of real sort of charisma as a personality that you're essentially going to spend a great deal of time with, and we're watching someone essentially on this treadmill cycle, which I understand is how the industry works. I mean, you create content, you put content out there, content gets ignored, you go back and make more content. Yeah, I get that. I mean, this is what we do here,
Yeah.
but obviously in the podcasting form, you just here on your little desert island throwing out bottles, hoping that someone's going to come along in their speedboat to pay you to write bottles for them. But yeah, it's sort of like very much the case of he just seems to be constantly depressed all the time, apart from when he gets his dog, which I was kind of relieved to have like something happy in this film. But a lot of the time it just feels like, oh, everything's like really everything's sort of stacked against us, and you sort of get used to that sort of thing, and then we get into the last half an hour, and then suddenly it's sort of like, oh, the industry's also stacked against you if you're a woman, and it's sort of like, well, what's that got to do with your journey? It's sort of like, you're just basically feels like he's including any interview footage he's about to get rather than editing out anything that's not essential to the journey he's taking. He's just now basically working in, so now it's just everyone basically complaining about how tough the industry is, and it's like, yes, I get the industry's hard, but this is the nature of the business. To then start working in, it's hard because of my ethnicity or my gender, it just felt like a different film that had been sort of tacked into this film just to sort of pad out the runtime. And I felt that if this had been hacked down to like an hour, this would have been pretty a more engaging film. But because he's obviously going for the feature length, that last half an hour is just absolutely tedious throughout, and it just feels that at this point you're just basically hearing the same things of like, yes, everything's very tough, and you've got to do all these things to sort of make yourself stand out in this industry. And all the time you're like looking at his career, and he's sort of like, he's out there, he's making films, he's getting into festivals and stuff, and you're thinking, and yet all you're doing is sort of like complaining that it's not this big break. And it's only once he gets to the end that he sort of has this realization, sees what we the audience have been sort of seeing the whole time, that he has been making it as a filmmaker, and just because he's not been having this superstar like breakout film, he's not had like his Blair Witch or his Reservoir Dogs or Clerks or this sort of fantasy sort of like just being sort of discovered the way that we had like in like the late 80s, early 90s with like the Sundance Kids, where they were like having these films like being picked up at Sundance and like launching them into like superstar sort of careers. It's just this slow realization of that he has been making it as a filmmaker all this time, but just not getting the recognition that he wanted. It just felt like
well, I don't know if I feel that way, because I feel like we're thinking about this right now, and this documentary was set years ago, right? If you think about in 2014, he wasn't in film festivals. His first film festival essentially was Fantasia, getting into Fantasia for world premiere of Life Changer. But before that, he had that short film that he was doing, or the 2 short films or something that he had done that had gotten in. But is that really, making it? I mean, as from my experience, I mean, I do watch a lot of I watch a lot of short films in festivals, but they're not meant to be, they're kind of like, your appetizer to a movie usually. They're not meant to be watched like in huge doses. Like there are certain sections of film festivals which are especially dedicated to short films. But it's more of doing a proof of concept, and obviously he's getting into festivals. It's showing that he's making it gradually. He's getting more recognized. He's meeting the right people, and he's being able to show his work a little bit more. But I actually, opposite from you, I actually thought the first 30 minutes was kind of a drag.
Okay.
I felt the beginning part, because it was just him constantly being on the phone, where it's just he's just trying to get the funding and it falls through, funding falls through, funding falls through. So it's very much a lot of the same going on. And what's interesting in the first part is more on the interview part than on his part. But then when we hit like the second part, after he starts going to festivals and he starts making things to promote it, and then he starts going into the frontier market and all those little things, those are all changing factors in his story. And it's little things that he's learned. And I think it's one thing that, you know, maybe a lot, I don't know if a lot of like indie directors really know about frontier market. 'Cause I mean, I just wonder if they do. And like for me at least, I didn't know about the Cannes thing where there's like, it's like a market for, you know, people to sell their movies and stuff like that. It's a lot of interesting little things that I didn't know about. And I find that the second half had a lot more insightfulness to it. I do agree that the whole part about women, not that I don't think that that's a valid conversation. I think it's a conversation for another documentary. Because that part happened and then I was kind of like, what? How? What just happened?
Yeah.
Why are we switching to this right now? And then, but luckily it was a fairly short bit that he talked about it. So it wasn't like he jumped too far away. I think it was just the fact that he did have a few very like interesting points from the people that he interviewed. I think it's good. It just didn't seem to fit into this documentary.
Yeah, it always. I mean, obviously, I've got, you know, white male privilege here, but it's always so frustrating when you hear people complain about the disadvantage that that their gender and or whatever presents, and then you look at it from your own sort of perspective, and you think, well, I have all these sort of setbacks because I'm not. Obviously, I don't have these advantages that, from my perspective, I see people as obviously having. So it's it just really didn't engage me, but I did think it was, as I said, it's something for another documentary, and I kept, as I said, I keep looking at his career sort of path and stuff, and the fact that he's obviously out there. And I just wasn't sure whether this film worked better if it was just sort of, if they cut out his journey and just kept it as the talking head parts, because certainly with the interview parts, we've got some very interesting bits and pieces in there. Like, we've obviously got the director of Manborg there, and his particular studio have been real sort of independent sort of rebels out there, just like making small independent films, and sort of going this sort of like true independent sort of route. And we see a lot of directors and producers of like projects I really, really liked, such as like Turbo Kid. And then you have like people like Michael Biehn, who apparently can't say the Terminator saga, but instead has to go Terminator 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's sort of like, no, you don't need to count them all out. We know how many there are. He was so intense in this documentary. I don't know why he was so intense, but he was like just sitting in his backyard and just looking so angry the whole way through. So. But yeah, Del Toro is really great in this. I think seeing Del Toro's parts in particular just like made me nostalgic for our second season, when we just get to wade through like hours and hours of special content with Del Toro talking about things that he loves. And you could see, he still has that sort of like independent filmmaker spirit when you like hear him talk about films. And he's like talking about Pacific Rim. And he's like, yes, it's sort of like, you know, I was the kid with the dinosaur and the Iron Man figure, like smashing them together, and this is the sort of person who goes and makes a film like Pacific Rim. So, yeah, I think he added a lot to it.
He did add a lot. I mean, because, you know, Del Toro is all about being himself.
Oh,
and
of course.
I think that was one of the messages that you come out from, is that when you make a movie, you have to be yourself. You have to be confident in yourself, confident in your vision. And I mean, as crazy as some of Guillermo del Toro's ideas are, and obviously we've looked at a lot of them where there's a lot of twists, a lot of turns, a lot of elements that adds a new twist to the traditional genre that we've seen of many, many movies. and many, many subgenres of horror, this is the person who believes in kind of taking a different path from the norm. And I feel like that's what stands out in the indie and you know, genre cinema, indie, independent market, is those people who are able to visualize a movie that's different from what someone has done. It's obviously, you know, we're sitting here talking about it. I've never made a movie. I've never written a script. So it's easier said than done for sure. But, you know, a lot of times is you just have to believe in that vision that he has. And I think, you know, in terms of McConnell, I mean, for me at least, I think Life Changer was definitely a game changer for him, because it had a very unique concept to just the story he was trying to tell and the horror behind it and that whole shape-shifting element that he adds in and how it all works. I mean, if you haven't seen Life Changer, I definitely think you should. But I mean, see, that's kind of like these people are talking, you know, like obviously Del Toro is, you know, I think he was the one who talked about, you know, how the industry is so big that now people are talking about the industry in terms of like how you fit into a pipeline and then the sewage, and you know, they're using sewage terms to talk about the funding of movies and stuff. And I really like that part. I think it's a thing that I've never thought about.
Well, yeah, it's basically it's just all about this flow of content. It's just about how we keep this flow of content going. I had to wonder though if like McConnell was like how pissed McConnell was when when he sees that the guys who made Sky Sharks got funding for their film.
I know.
Because I looked up the trailer for Sky Sharks and I was like, this is bloody awful. So it's kind of like,
and then it was like it was Raven Banner, I think, who took them, I think, wasn't it? And then they got Sony to back them, I think. So it's I was just like, no, that's crazy, you know.
But yeah, it is an actual movie. It's kind of like Iron Sky meets Sharknado. I don't know. There's part of me that kind of wants to watch it, and part of me thinks that's just life's too short to be subjecting yourself to these things.
You know, our next Shark Week, we can consider Sky Sharks.
We're really scraping the barrel now, aren't we?
You never know. Like, look, if there's anything I learned from this documentary, and it's one thing that I've solidified from everything, is that sometimes, especially in indie cinema, what you need to think about is keep a very open mind to everything. I've seen trailers which look really bad, and when you take a chance on the movie on that low budget and they can embrace that budget and use it properly, there are some really, really great low budget movies out there that, you know, obviously I went in and I didn't expect it to be good, and it turned out to be really great. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about doing the festival circuit and covering these festival circuits, because you always find movies that surprise you. Whereas, you know, when you watch mainstream movies, you have this constant expectation of the movie being good to live up to, you know, the budget that they put into it. Whereas, and it's constantly, you know, there's the majority of the time, a lot of them are very disappointing. But I don't know. I guess that's just my vision of it. But I mean, talking back about the documentary, one of the things I really did like was the different elements that he talks about in just kind of like being a filmmaker in this landscape. And one of the things that I thought was really great is that the mention of, you know, like the whole keyboard warriors sort of thing, about how people view movies right now with the saturated market and you know, how there's just an immense amount of criticism in the business.
Definitely so, and as they point out, I mean, it's a lot of the keyboard warriors who feel no sort of shame in tearing this thing that you spend all your time and effort making, and just sit there tearing it apart with sort of little concern over the effort that went into making it. And obviously this is cited with The Collapsed, which is his one. It's a film which he feels that did sort of middling business. With it, it's a post-apocalyptic film in a sort of low-budget way. But it's sort of like this idea that, you know, films are now more disposable than they used to be, and you hear this a lot now when people are talking about that back in the day when you'd like rent something from the video store, you'd actually to make the effort to watch it all the way through. But now, because of there being so much content, and especially when you look at the streaming giants out there, you know, like Amazon Prime and Netflix, the fact that if you're watching something and you get bored like partway through, you just turn it off and you go and look at something else. So
and then your continue watching list like is never ending.
I can't personally do it, but I know there's people out there. I hate having this idea of things being unfinished. I to drag myself through things, so maybe that's why I'm so picky about what I watch now. So, but yeah, I mean, this film's sort of equal parts cautionary tale to aspiring filmmakers and an insight to the outsiders of the film industry, of how the industry works, and compared to other films that we've seen in the covering this sort of topic. I mean, there's the documentary about getting films into film festivals, and it's the sobering takes that really make you wonder why anyone sort of sets out to try and be a filmmaker when you have this sort of like harsh reality thrown at you. So I'm not sure whether this is going to inspire or deter more people from trying to make a career in the film industry or not, but parts both like a tedious and interesting look at the industry as a whole, I felt.
I don't know. I think that there's you know, he calls this film, this documentary, pretty much a survival guide. And in the end, do you think that it is? I mean, for me, I personally think that he does give a lot of really good options. Like I said, I mean, a lot of options I didn't know about. I did know about Frontier because that's like a big deal in Fantasia. There's a lot of, and then, you know, the different paths it has to go through and all those things. I think that if you want to be a filmmaker, filmmakers are, I always think that when you go into like the art path, you start off as a dreamer and you will keep pursuing your dreams. And then the realistic side hits you, and this is what this movie's about. It's about when a dreamer meets the reality of things, and it kind of puts you off a little on it, but as you persist, you realize that, you know, in the end, his positive message is really the fact that he realizes that he you know, the pretty much the fact that he's pretty much in this business, even though, you know, there's not a whole lot of stuff to show for it, but, you know, to him. But then at the same time, he's also been making movies for, you know, a few decades at this point, right? 2 decades or something at this point.
Yes, I mean, he's made feature, you know, films. It's not just shorts that he's been making. I mean, he obviously does film. He did like Broken Mile, he did The Collapse, he did Skull World, and he also did a documentary. Yeah, and
we saw the filming for Do You See What I See? That was during the thing as well. And
so it's not like he's not had feature films out there. It's more just the fact of that they've not had the success that he wants. That's what I
feel like it's more of the term of just, you know, like not being able to get the financing, right? This is essentially what this is about. It's surviving being this in a mental state of this painful experience of finding that first company who's going to be willing to put money into your work. And then hopefully this person believes in your vision so much that it will be a long-term kind of partnership.
Yeah, definitely so. And I think to his credit, I mean, he gets Richard Stanley, who certainly knows a thing or two about trying to get films off the ground. I mean, when we look at his failed production of The Island of Dr. Moreau, which was very well charted in Lost Souls, I think if anyone knows the struggles of trying to get a film made, I mean, it's really thanks to Spectrevision sort of bringing him out of the wilds to do a Colour from Outer Space. That we, saw him again.
I really like Richard Stanley's part because he like outlines the whole like different phases of being like a indie filmmaker. Every single phase he talks about is kind of like you start at this like kind of, he has like these different parts where he's talking about, at the end where you have different phases, and at the end you're kind of like at this phase where you're not sure about, all these different things that are going on and whatnot, and it's really, I find Richard Stanley really, I think his phase 3 was something about you give up your life. Like, you give it up and you don't want to have anything to do with it, or you're at this phase of the project. I found that hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, he has that wonderful analogy that, your film's like this child, and you send it off out into the world once it's completed, and it goes and finds its own friends, and and you, even though you have nothing to do with it anymore, it just goes off and creates this life of its own. I think that's just such an interesting idea. Again, it's all about, while this film's obviously about filmmaking, I mean, you can apply it to so many of the sort of creative fields. Yeah. Just this idea of once you put something out there, it just sort of takes on a life of its own. The filmmaker's journey, which detracted from the most part, the interesting talking head parts, and I think it's because he introduced a lot of people that I'm a fan of. There's a lot of cool horror figures in there. I mean, you've got people like Brian Trenchard Smith. I mean, you've got George A. Romero. You've obviously got Lloyd Kaufman, because you can't talk about independent filmmaking without Lloyd Kaufman appearing in your film. It's the law. I think even Brian Yazuna turns up at one point as well.
There's Tom Savini, and there's
and Sid Haig, who I think it must have been really towards the end of Sid Haig, because he looks very unwell, and Dick Miller, who I'm also a huge fan of, and I didn't realise that he was also looking really unwell as well. So I think that he really got those interviews right at the end for a lot of these people, because they weren't looking to a little worse for wear. So, but yeah, as I said, it's not a film that really sort of worked for myself. I think, Kim, you had a different experience with it, though.
Yeah, it's like I said. I mean, for me, it's a bit different because I have been in, I have seen Life Changer, and Life Changer was kind of was a memorable experience. Like, for me, a movie, and I think it was 2 festivals ago at this point, and I still remember a lot of the movie, which is for us who watches like what to other people it's really little, but we watch like 300 movies a year. It's really hard to remember a lot of the movies that we watch unless they make an impact. And to me, I didn't to watch McConnell see him go through this experience, and it was kind of an educational turn on seeing the different angles and really, I think, having a different appreciation for genre cinema. You never, for me, I never think that it's an easy process. There's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of things that need to be done, and we know about it, especially because we're in this, we're pretty much watching this business as it grows, because, especially for myself, because I cover Fantasia so much. But for me, it was also great because, obviously with our current pandemic going on, this was my little, I guess, obviously this is part of the virtual version of Fantasia that we're releasing this. But at the same time, he interviewed a lot of people that were in the circuit, the festival circuit, that I kind of, obviously I'm not friends with them, but I have seen them in the circuit a lot, and it's interesting that I know that, obviously I know that their vision and their view on this topic is, they have some legit opinions on it. And
yeah.
And so for me, it kind of drags me a little closer to the people that I usually would have seen if I went in person to the film festival, like people like Mitch Davis is a big part of Fantasia, and if you've never experienced Mitch Davis introducing your movie, I don't know, you really need to. Mitch Davis introduces your movie, he is the most enthusiastic person in the room. Just the way he introduces a movie, it's something that irreplaceable.
So for reviewing, if you obviously enjoyed this film, what would you recommend watching next, if anything?
Well, for me, I think I've already mentioned pretty much. I don't watch a lot of documentaries, so I don't have documentaries to suggest except for Playing Hard, which is, if you think, I mean, it's not obviously the indie market so much, but it's definitely the gaming market on the AAA, about just how greenlighting a new IP is really hard in the industry, and having someone put that same kind of faith. So Playing Hard is a really gives you a really good vision of that whole process. It's very similar, I guess, in parallel to this one. Obviously, it deals with a bigger company like Ubisoft, so it's a whole different ball game. But I mean, other than that, I would definitely highly recommend. Since we're talking about McConnell's documentary, and we see that Life Changer is released, I would recommend. I would pair this with Life Changer as well.
Great. For myself, there's a couple of films out there. The first one I would recommend checking out is This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which is a look at movie censorship and the ratings process for America. Really fascinating documentary, and also features some really fantastic deleted sequences from movies such as like American Pie and Team America World Police. That it's kind of interesting, kind of funny when you hear like Matt and Trey talk about how their way of tackling the censors was to basically throw every perverted thing that they could do with puppets at the screen, because they knew that they would cut it down for them. And that if they just basically went in with like just the standard sort of puppet sex scenes, that they would have ended up with nothing. So it's kind of fun just to see how the system works in terms of censorship, and also how filmmakers play the system at the same time. The other side of things is another documentary about another independent filmmaker, and that is American Movie from 1999, directed by Chris Smith. And this film is kind of like Spinal Tap, but about horror filmmaking. And it's actually just it's an actual bona fide documentary. It's not like a parody or anything like that, even though when you watch it, you would think that it is. But it follows filmmaker Mark Bordash as he attempts to finish his film that he's been working on. And basically, he spent 2 years trying to get this horror film made. And basically just follows him and his friend as they try to get the film finished. But at the same time, he's the sort of personality where he seems to have convinced himself he's one of the greatest filmmakers ever lived, just waiting to be recognized for his talent. So it's certainly a very unique film, and a very interesting look at the independent filmmaking scene of the late 90s. So, but I think it's definitely one that you should check out as well if you like this film, or just wanted to see another film about independent filmmakers. Cool. So that brings us to the end of another edition of Movies and Tea. Thank you as always for listening. You can find our full archive of episodes on moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And if you haven't done already, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons wherever you happen to be listening to us. Maybe leave us a review, as it all helps raise the profile of the show. But until next time, thank you to my co-host Kim, and we'll be back soon. Until then, good night.